How's it going, guys, and welcome to Game and Evolved. I'm Shifty Cow, and in today's video we're going to be talking about relearning vehicles in Battlefield 4. So before we get into it, if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, be sure to drop a like, and if you are new to our channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button as we do post Battlefield content daily. So ever since playing Battlefield 4 on PC, it's been kind of difficult trying to get used to all the different controls, especially when you're in something like a Little Bird or a Jet, because the turning with a mouse and keyboard feels a lot different than it does with something like an Xbox controller, where you have a lot more control over how you're flying around, but it is a lot harder to aim. So I've gradually gotten used to it, especially now that I've kind of warmed up to infantry gameplay, and it's actually a lot of fun to go on some really nice kill streaks, especially in things like Little Birds or LAVs, which I've finally started upgrading things, and I still don't have active protection, which is probably one of the most important things to unlock, but I am getting there, and it is a lot of fun. Now, the gameplay you guys are watching right now, one of it is going to be a Little Bird streak on Silk Road, and the other one is an LAV streak on Operation Whiteout, and keep in mind, these are both just one kill streak, just extended out over a couple of minutes, so hopefully you guys do enjoy that, but I'm just going to talk about some quick tips that I've found while trying to move from PC and just get good at vehicles. So the first thing I did to make sure I'd be really comfortable but also quick while using vehicles is I adjusted all my settings and my key bindings. Now usually when I'm changing key bindings, I like to keep it as close as it is to the default, so that way if anything gets deleted, I can either just go back in and change it really quickly, and also I just wanted to make sure that I have a couple of things on my mouse like switching weapons and deploying countermeasures, and those are just going to be my two mouse side buttons, which are really easy to click, and that way I have a much faster time to click it and I'm not stumbling over the keyboard looking for keys. So that's my first tip, is make sure you're pretty comfortable with key bindings, and I personally would recommend putting your most used keys or your hardest to reach keys just on your mouse, so that way you can quickly access them and be a lot more accurate. So while we're talking about settings, I also decided to bump up my sensitivity from 20 all the way up to 50, and the main reason I did this was in a vehicle, you really don't have to worry too much about recoil. There's a couple of things that recoil a little bit, but for the most part, there's nowhere near as much recoil as there is as an infantryman, so you don't have to worry about that throwing off your accuracy, and if you're able to quickly whip around your tank turret, that can mean the difference between life and death. So just kind of find a good sensitivity, but for most parts, you're going to want to have a much higher vehicle sensitivity than you would in infantry. Now, the second tip I wanted to talk about is having the correct loadout for what situation you're in, and by default, most of the loadouts are actually pretty solid for the vehicles. The tank and the IRV are probably the biggest things that I would worry about because you really do need to unlock active protection, and that's one of the last unlocks for tanks, so that's just going to be a lot of grinding, whether you're sitting in there as a gunner, or you're just helping out the tank, driving around trying to get some points. That'll really help for unlocking that, and I would highly recommend grinding that out. Now, while we're also talking about loadouts, you want to make sure that you're making it different for each round based on what type of gameplay you're probably going to experience. So, for example, if you're in an LAV and there's only one other LAV on the enemy team and that's the only vehicle that you really have to worry about, you can probably be safe to put on just the normal cannons and then switch on over to the LMGs as your secondary rather than going with something like the tow missile, because the tow missile is going to be really good for taking out that LAV, but the biggest threat for you right now is going to be infantry, and especially if you have a lot of engineers pushing with you and you're smart about whether or not to push or kind of pull back and retreat, that's going to really help, and you're going to get pretty much twice the firepower because rather than only being able to use your cannons, you can use your cannons and LMG. So definitely something to think about, and you should approach every situation thinking about what your loadout is and what your strengths and weaknesses are. So I just want to quickly run over my default loadouts that I run for most maps, and you of course can customize these based on what type of gameplay, but for tanks I usually use the standard AP shells followed by the HMGs because I can be pretty accurate with them and they take a couple less shots to kill, especially at range. Also, I use active protection and reactive armor. Those tend to be really good for defensive gameplay, and also if you're not using active, you pretty much get screwed over on most engagements. Moving on to the infantry fighting vehicle, I usually go with the default 25mm cannons just because you can use those on vehicles and infantry, and then I also like to go with either the tow missile, or if there's a lot of infantry and we have a lot of engineers, I'll go with the LMG just because you're pretty much doubling your firepower and you can quickly take out infantry. As for the Little Bird, I like to go with the miniguns just because I can personally be pretty accurate with them, and if there's any Little Birds in the air, you can pretty much down them insanely quickly with these versus something like the 25mm cannons. So if you're starting off, I would highly recommend using the 25mm cannons just to kind of start off. You can take out some infantry, destroy a couple vehicles, and overall they're really nice to use. But if you do decide to use the 25mm cannons, you should probably throw on the heat seekers, so that way it's a little bit easier to take out enemy aircraft. So that's pretty much it for what you want to go with on your vehicles. Anything other than that you can probably adjust to just personal preference. I would recommend tinkering around with everything just to see what you like, and if you do go to forum posts to see the best loadouts, feel free to kind of try things other than that, because what may not work for them might work for you. There are a couple of things that are just night and day differences on what's better, but for the most part, a lot of it is just personal preference. So my last tip for you guys for getting better at vehicles is to utilize the test range. A lot of the times when I want to practice something, I actually hop into a test range rather than hopping into a public round, because first of all, you're not going to get nearly as frustrated. In fact, you'll probably get bored after probably 5 to 10 minutes of just flying around, but once you do get bored, it means you're probably either comfortable and you're not crashing, and you're probably going to be ready to hop into a public round and not do nearly as bad as you would as if you just hopped into a round and started flying a helicopter or flying a jet. So definitely take some time to practice. You're not going to get it the first try, and it'll probably take a good maybe half hour to an hour of playing to get some level of comfort, and really that just comes with a lot of practice. But hopefully you guys did find these tips helpful. If you did, be sure to tell me down in the comments below and drop a like on this video. But until next time guys, stay buttery.